No one was harmed in the filming of this sequence.
The shit you and your friends do in a pub is what I do and somehow get paid for it.
That's my natural hairline there now.
Comedians we're very judgmental.
I don't really think that the American people are more polarized now than they were 10 years ago.
Hey, I'm Mike Sheridan and you're welcome along to another conversation on the Delve. So my guest today is someone I have long admired. John Heilemann has been involved with covering politics in one form or another for a long time. He is one of the producers and stars of the excellent series The Circus Inside the Greatest Political Show on Earth. He's a co-founder of The Recount, which he also hosts an excellent podcast for, and you can regularly catch John on MSNBC giving his typically astute analysis. Look, everybody knows I love talking politics with guests, but very few have the kind of common sense insight that John Heilemann possesses. So enjoy the chat and make sure to subscribe whether you're listening as a podcast or watching on YouTube.
You know, I lived in London when I worked at The Economist magazine from 1990-ish to 1990. Well, I worked there until 1995, 1996, but I was in London for 91, 92, 93, basically, with a little bit of bleed into 94. And I went somewhat frequently. Like, I mean, half a dozen times, 8 times, 10 times, I don't know, in the course of the time I lived there. And I think I've been back like maybe 3 or 4 times since. It's been about a decade. I think I was at the busk. I was at the Christmas busk on whatever Grafton Street in like 2013, I think, which was the busk that like Sinead O'Connor came up, showed up and led the crowd in a very funny version, a combination of like a Christmas version of Nothing Compares to You. I haven't been back. That's the last time I was there.
It's I've like edited a few publications here as well, and I would always work Christmas Day because I don't have kids. And it was the one story we could be guaranteed on Christmas Day that you could write. It's like, the guys are on Grafton Street, they're doing the busk on Christmas Eve. We could do the video the next day. It was great.
Totally. I mean, Glenn, I don't know. It's like Glenn Hansard, like a national treasure. Like, like he sort of seems like he should be, right?
Yeah, he's really well known. I think people love that movie. And John Carney as well is such a brilliant director. He does but he's probably not as well revered as he should be, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, people obviously outside, because of that movie at the time, he got like a little bit of profile here. And but I feel like, he maybe it's just my sort of sense of the busk. It's like, he's he feels like very beloved in Ireland. I don't really know, but I feel like he's like, I feel like he's kind of like integrated. There's a kind of thing about him. I don't know. The Frames are a band I used to love, and they were never really a band here. Like, people never really knew them. And the few times they ever toured here, I got people to go. I remember taking a bunch of people to the Beacon once. They played up with Damien Rice. It's got me like 10 years ago now. It's been a long time, but like, whenever I see him in like video from the Grafton Street thing, I'm always like, oh, that guy's like, he's just, I mean, I don't know, he seems like a good dude. I don't know, I've never met him in my life. He seems like a good dude, in addition to like being obviously a pretty great musician.
It's a nice level of fame, I think, that, because people know who you are, but people won't approach it unless they're fans, like they're real fans. So that it's like almost like that movie director level of fame.
It's always been my impression. Like, one of the things that I like about Ireland is like, and maybe this is not true anymore, I don't know, but like the few times I was ever in Ireland with like that, at that time, the story I was just telling a second ago, the few times I was ever in Ireland with you too, it always seemed like weird how like people were just like, we're not gonna, like, they would get a lot more attention here. Like, if Bono walked down Madison Avenue here, not now so much, but like, probably even to some extent now, but back at the peak of his fame, it would have been a mob scene, right? And like, if you were like in a pub in Ireland with Don Bono, people like seemed like studiously like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to swarm around him. We'll tip our hat. That's about it. Maybe I'll send him give me a Bono. I like that last track. Or that last album was shite. That's about it. But not like, oh, Bono.
No, we don't really. I think we have too much shame here, John. The Irish, we've too much shame. It's like anybody who's famous in particular, we generally be like, I know the younger generation is a different thing entirely. But in saying that, now, when Obama was here, and was it 2010?
Yes. Yes,
And
that was people went bonkers, right?
Think about box.
Yeah.
So he interviewed Brendan. It would have been around 2010. He interviewed Brendan Gleeson the next day, and he gave this incredible speech. And I have not seen 2011, I think it was. I've never seen anything like that. That was like a whole other. So, like in the political world, these superstars just seem to reverberate more.
Well, you can in a way, it's like the Irish don't have that, they can let it all. They can let they can wear their hearts on their sleeve for someone like Obama, who's not. Although Obama now claims he has some Irish roots. If I believe it was on that trip when he was like, he claimed that he discovered there was some black.
You won't believe this. You won't believe this, John. There is what would you call it, gas station in where near where Obama where his ancestors apparently are from, called Obama Plaza in Offaly. And it's like, you think it's going to be this like almost theme park. You walk in, it's literally just a cardboard cutout of Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, and that's it. But there was a lot of fanfare, similar for Clinton as well, and Biden's Irish, so we'll take him too. But the Georgia runoff obviously happened last night. It was closer than I think people thought it was going to be, was it?
I don't know. Like I think the consensus polling. Somebody asked me the other day what I thought, and I generally really avoid prediction because, as my favorite political philosopher, the great American baseball player Yogi Berra once put it, prediction is always difficult, especially about the future. So, I try to stay away from it. But the polling averages had it about 3 points, and like it ended up being about 3 points. I think there was a moment last night where everybody was looking at the county results coming in and saying, early in the evening, we're like, oh, Warnock's got this in the bag. And then it got tight for a little while. And people started like saying, well, it's closer than people thought. And then it ended up like, if you look at the final results this morning, it said, he won by about 3, which is really what the polling average had it at. And is not, I mean, if you are of the view, as some people are, that Herschel Walker's an utter embarrassment, and not fit to be, not mentally fit, capable, competent to be a United States senator, the fact that it was that close is disturbing, I guess, to some people. I, think that Georgia is basically still a Republican state, and you can tell that it's a Republican state by the way that Brian Kemp, who, is a conservative by any stretch of the imagination, but has avoided getting the stench of Donald Trump all over him, and he beat Stacey Abrams by 8 points. Like, it wasn't close in the governor's race, right? That's basically a Republican state, and this takes nothing away from Raphael Warnock to say this, but he's been blessed in both of his races. He's a talented candidate. He's a talented senator. He has a big, bright future in the Democratic Party, but he's been, in basically what's still a reddish purple state, and not really at all a bluish purple state, let alone a pure purple, let alone a bluish purple state, not even a purple state. He's basically been blessed with 2 races, which Donald Trump, was either very actively involved in 2020 when he was, but in the middle of that race, in the middle of that runoff, telling people not to vote early because, it was all rigged, sending a message to Republican voters that they shouldn't really vote because it was a rigged system. Or in this race where he wasn't actively involved so much, but Herschel Walker was his child. He was, his political love child. Warnock had the benefit of that, which basically meant there were a ton of Republican voters in Georgia, the suburban moderate Republican voters who all voted for Brian Kemp, and looked at Walker in the initial race in November, and then looked at him again in the runoff and said, I can't do this. He's not. And Trump, basically, I'm not saying Trump gave the race to Warnock, but Warnock was benefited. If Warnock had to run against Brian Kemp, in either one of those races, he almost certainly would have lost, and not because he's not good, but just because Georgia's basically still a Republican place. So, winning by 3, solid for him, and I think sets him up. I'll say, say something nice about him. I think his campaign was very strong, and a man who has now won 5 elections in Georgia in the last few years, and has proven, even with all the caveats I just put forward, has proven that he can win at the statewide level. An eloquent Black Democrat who can win at the statewide level in Georgia, which is now, like, along with Arizona, really the frontier of American politics, like the ultimate swing state, is a guy who's going to be in everybody's discussion for a Democratic presidential candidate, in whether that's in 2024 if Joe Biden decides not to run, or 2028 when the race will now be an open field. That's a guy who's going to run for president, and he's going to have a decent claim to being competitive, given that the Democrats are now moving Georgia into the top tier of their their primary system. So it's going to become a very important state in the Democratic primaries, and he's going to have a very strong case to make that he has the ability to win in one of the most important states in the country. So, a star is born in some sense in Raphael Warnock as of yesterday.
There's a bit of a stench of Donald Trump at the moment, though, isn't there? And I mean,
all over everything. The whole so Donald Trump's stench is like, you get it from east, west, north, south, all day long, 24/7. Yeah,
but it's. I mean, look at Oz in Pennsylvania as well. Like, and Walker, they're both. This is going to follow them forever. They were. I'm sure they were both doing fine in their respective careers to some degree, and now they've both lost elections that were overly hyped to a massive degree.
I mean, look, I think we'll see. I mean, look, Herschel Walker will go back to his life, I assume, and he'll always be revered as this great football legend in Georgia, and he lives in Texas basically, and he was making a fine life for himself. And I don't think his life will be appreciably worse than when he went down the path of running for Senate. I think he might think he wasted a year of his life or so. Dr. Oz is a rich man, and he'll be fine too. It's more that, like, the biggest question in American politics right now is whether the Republican Party, and I mean that in the most broad sense. I don't mean like the chairman of the party or Mitch McConnell. I mean like the voters in the Republican Party who are really in charge. Whether people are going to look up and realize that Donald Trump is a loser. I mean, is someone who has just inflicted electoral damage on the party for years now. It's like, he cost them the 2018 midterms. He cost them the presidency in 2020. He cost them the Senate in 2020. He didn't help them at the House level in 2020. And then in 2022, everything he touched, I mean, he endorsed a lot of candidates who were going to win no matter what. But in most of the contested races, you could throw Arizona into that group. You could throw Nevada into that group. The only win he can really count in the Senate races was J.D. Vance, and his win-loss record in contested tight Senate races was terrible. And if you ask most Republicans who are familiar with data, they all say Trump is an albatross now for the party. He's toxic with swing voters who decide close elections, and he's not toxic with the Republican base, but he's toxic with the people you need to win if you're going to win statewide in a lot of states, and certainly if you're going to be a national force. And so, my question throughout the entirety of Trump's Trump era has been, as other people wondered, well, when will the Republicans abandon Trump? When will he go too far? And my answer was always, that will never be the thing. They will never abandon Trump. They've demonstrated that. They're like, there's nothing he could say or do that would be so heinous that they would walk away from him. Unfortunately, the thing that will cause them to walk away from him, I used to say, was when it became clear that the electoral costs, that their personal political interests were not served by aligning themselves with him. And now that question is very squarely before them. Like, this is the moment, like, where you can't look at what's happened and not say the smart thing to do is to cut the fucker loose. And yet, there's still a large, he still is the most popular person in the Republican Party with the Republican voters who matter the most. So we'll see what happens over the next year or so.
So Trump decides, obviously he said he's going to run. It's probably unclear whether he is going to run or not. But if the Republicans do cut Donald Trump loose, he runs as an independent and he loses anyway because he siphons away some of the vote from Ron DeSantis or Mike Pence or whoever that nominee is. So it's a lose-lose situations for the Republicans in many ways.
I think it's obviously that's a danger. You can't play these games, though, of like trying to lay out the snares. Nobody knows. Donald Trump is the most unpredictable force in American politics. Like, people say, well, if you cut him loose, he runs independent. Does he? I don't know. I mean, as we sit here right now, I don't know a whole bunch of things. Again, going back to my prediction is difficult about the future. We don't know, is he going to be under indictment? He could be plausibly, he could be under one or more federal criminal indictments. Can you run for office under indictment? You can. Does indictment hurt him or help him with the Republican Party? If you look at the way the Republicans rallied around him after the search and seizure at Mar-a-Lago, you would say, it seems to help him with the Republican Party. But is that the case going forward after these midterm elections and the electoral costs he's inflicted on them? Or does the party look at that and say, God, it's time, give the guy a gold watch and pat him on the head and tell him that he made America great again and let's move on and talk about the future. I don't know. Is he under indictment? What's the effect of the indictments? There's so many unpredictable elements just in the environment. And then there's the unpredictability of Donald Trump's head. There's no doubt he's as you rightly expressed some skepticism. He says he's going to run. Is he really going to run? Don't know.
There's been no rallies.
There's no doubt he'll threaten to run as an independent if he were to lose the Republican nomination. But will he actually do that? Will there be money for him among donors? He's not going to spend any of his own money to do anything. So like if the money dries up because, say, the Republican voters choose Ron DeSantis or choose, Mike Pence or choose, Mike Pompeo or anybody else, Nikki Haley, if the money dries up and the donor class walks away from Trump, is Trump going to self-fund an independent campaign? I'll tell you, that's the one answer I really can predict. The answer to that is no. Donald Trump's not going to self-fund anything. So I think in the end, if the part that, this is one of those things where at some point you have to, if you're a Republican and you have come to the conclusion, even if you have no principles, you have no soul, you have no concern about democratic values, you have no concern about constitutional norms, you just care about winning. You have to look and go, you know what? Yeah, maybe in the worst case, it is a lose-lose cycle in 2024. But at some point, we got to begin the process of getting rid of this guy, because we have to find a way towards the future where we can win nationally again. And Donald Trump has proven, in 2 successive national elections, he can't win a majority of the popular vote here. He just can't. And he's getting less popular every day. So if the party wants to eventually be a party that could win 51% at the presidential level, they're going to have to move past Donald Trump. That's going to have to happen. And I know some of them just wish he'd be struck down by lightning or hit by a bus, but that's something you can't count on either.
And it's, conversely with the Democrats as well, Biden seems like he's weighing up whether he's going to run or not. And I know you'd said previously as well, that'll be a couple of months. He'll say he's going to do it on this day, and then two months later, he'll say he's going to run. Is there an inkling, do you think, that Joe Biden will run again for a second term, despite saying he'll be a transitional president? Because one of the main reasons being there's no other front runner. Kamala Harris doesn't seem to be popular at the moment in polls. Pete Buttigieg is somebody who's been muted a lot. But you're essentially then going to have a very messy primary, like the last time in 2020 where there was 20-something candidates all tearing strips off each other.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of that matters to Joe Biden. I think what matters to Joe Biden is I've known the guy for a very long time. I met him in 1986 when I was still in college. And the only thing you can say about Joe Biden, the most important thing you can say about Joe Biden is that what he has done for his entire adult life is run for office. That's all he's ever done. It's the only thing he knows. He's run for things he's won. He's won for things he's lost. He's run for things where he's tried to drop out. He famously, unsuccessfully tried to run for president a whole bunch of different times, and then finally got it together and won. I just like there's old dogs and new tricks, and like for him, not running would be a new trick. And they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And Joe Biden is a politician to his core. So that's the first thing to note, I would say. Obviously age catches up with all of us at some point. I don't personally believe it's ever going to catch up with me, because my doctor tells me I'm a space alien and I'm going to live to be 230. But other than that, it does catch up with the rest of us. And so, does Joe Biden eventually, does he yield to age? I mean, look, there's no one who watches the guy go about his business every day now who doesn't recognize that the man is I say this not in a harsh way, it's just a fact. He's showing his age. Everybody who gets, you get to your 80, if you're 80-year-olds,
yeah, people
who get into to be 80 in that general zone, they tend to start to look a little old, act old, be old. They are old. They're starting to get old, right? And I know a few ex-presidents, and if you were to get Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and George W. Bush and put them under sodium pentothal, they would all say, I couldn't have been a good president in my 70s. I wouldn't want to run for president. In Obama's case, he's looking forward, but they're like, I would be a terrible candidate in my 70s, and let alone my 80s. If Joe Biden wins the presidency again in 2024, and he finishes this term, he'll be closer to 90 than 80. He'll be 86 when he finishes his second term. I mean, I don't know if you've known anybody 86. 86-year-olds, like, the ones who are most with it, most clear-eyed, most clear-minded are just, they get tired easy. They're not at their best. They're not what they were when they were 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. And so I think people who love the Democratic Party and love Joe Biden and are grateful to him and fans of his, I get asked by Democrats every day, like, they watch him walk across the South Lawn and they think, he looks like my granddad, like, is he okay? Is that the best guy to be leading the ticket? And I think, Joe Biden hears that, I think he hears it, and I think he obviously, he lives in his own body. He knows what he's going through, and he, et cetera, et cetera. He knows what his status is. But there's also this part of him that, if Ron Klain, his chief of staff, or Barack Obama sat down with him and said, you know what, you saved the country, you beat Donald Trump, you did incredible things, you accomplished, you passed these giant bills, you had a really good midterm, and you know what, like, it's time for you to take a break. It'd be better for you. It'd be better for your life, your longevity. Be a granddad. Like, just take some time and pass the torch to somebody else. He would, I'm speaking here metaphorically, not literally. He would say, hold on for a second. Can I bring the White House staff in here? The old executive office building, West Wing, East Wing, congressional staff. How many people do you want to get in the room? Okay, how many people could fit? 2,000 people. Let's get them all here. Let's open up the White House. We'll bring everybody here. Okay, everybody. Hi, I'm Joe Biden. How many people here have beaten Donald Trump for president of the United States? I don't see any hands. Barack, you? No. Hillary, you? No. So I'm the one person who ever beat the guy and saved democracy by beating him. And now you're going to tell me that you have any say in this? Fuck you. Basically, I've earned the right to make this decision myself. And I don't really appreciate your advice, but I'm going to decide for myself. And I think the truth is that, having had a very successful midterm that no one predicted, like no one thought the Democrats would gain seats in the Senate and do as well as they did in the House. And having had a very productive 2 years in office, and seeing Donald Trump saying he's going to run again. So one of the things that Biden believes is that he's like best and maybe the only person who can still beat Trump. I think as you sit here today, he's more inclined to run than ever. That doesn't mean he's going to run. He's going to go and talk to his family. He's going to, do a bunch of things. It's going to take months. I think we're not going to hear from him in December or January or probably February. I imagine it'll be, if he says he's going to tell us in March, it will be May, because he's a terminal procrastinator on these things. But eventually he's going to make this decision with Jill. And I don't know how it's going to come out, but I'll tell you, sitting here today, if they had lost 60 seats in the House and lost control of the Senate, and he'd suffered a massive repudiation, there's no one who can tell me that he wouldn't have had a negative effect. And he wouldn't have thought, maybe the voices of the party, everyone in the world saying, you got to not run, it would have an effect on him. It would have had effect. A decisive effect, I don't know, but it would have had an effect. But right now, he's on top of the world. And so I think the odds of him running are much higher than they were, a month ago.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, John. I appreciate the time. But before we go, there's been this strange weaponization of the culture wars. And I think culture and politics have crossed over in a way that we've never really seen before. Like a lot of, I think, particularly Republican politicians are using the culture wars to become popular in politics. I looked at it. John Kennedy gave a speech. I don't know if you saw it. It was last night or yesterday or the day before, where he's talking about kale and this notion of elites and their elites. Like, John Kennedy went to Oxford, and he's playing a fool essentially to become popular. When did this happen, and how did it become so rampant in the Republican Party in particular, do you think?
I mean, it's not a new thing, and the notion of of Republicans, for example, attacking the New York Times and attacking the media, the liberal media, that's been going on my entire career. It's obviously more intense now than it was before, but it's gotten more and more intense over time. The idea of flyover country, as as people sometimes call it, red America, harnessing a grievance and resentment towards the cultural elite in Hollywood, on Wall Street, in the university class, in the academic class. That, again, these aren't new things. They are much more intense now, and they're much more etched in sort of stone, where there really are like two Americas. It used to be, John Edwards, when he campaigned for president, talked about the two Americas, and he was talking about, like, in the classic kind of the rich versus the poor sense. So now it's the two Americas. They're like, their culture is this red America, blue America divide. And the most popular television show in America right now is a show called Yellowstone, that literally no one in California, no one on the, I mean literally, but you could live in New Manhattan, you could ask 400 people on the street if they've ever watched Yellowstone. They have no idea what it is. And yet in large parts of the country, it's a cult of shows, and 13 million people a week watch the thing. And yet, and then there's people here who watch Succession, and and people in Arizona or people in Texas have no idea what succession is. So it's like there's this is a small trivial example, but that, you know, the thing that's most, so the divide is there. The I think what's interesting is that culture in a lot of ways has that sense of cultural division, which has always existed, has become central, which is to say, like, people out in most of America, like, they don't really, other than, I mean, kind of, there's like Democrats and Republicans all kind of have a dismal view about Washington, but like policy isn't really what divides people in a really intense way anymore. This sort of sense of like Republicans have harnessed this kind of reactionary view about things that are genuine, in some cases genuine excesses on the left. Like, woke culture is invited a lot of this, and I'm, you know, I'm an egalitarian to my core, and I think that marginalized and groups that have been fucked over for a long time, that like big efforts need to be made to remediate those situations. But when, you know, when people lecture, when people get on their high horses and lecture people about pronouns, that's where you get Herschel Walker saying stupid shit like, I don't get this like, what's a pronoun? It's like, well, let me take you to grammar class. I mean, a pronoun is, let me explain that to you, Herschel. But the notion that, like, you know, you know, there's a lot of America that sees people who on their bios and their profiles who say, you know, my pronouns are he, him, his, you know, and they go, you know, they feel as though like the cultural elite is forcing a kind of stultifying conformity on people, making people talk a certain way. And if you say the wrong word, you're going to get yelled at. If you ask a question about like transgender athletes, like, you know, if you ask a question, somebody yells at you and says that you're transphobic. You know, there are transphobic people. There are people who hate trans people. They shouldn't do that. But there are also like people who in the Democratic Party, and this is what Barack Obama's been talking about when he went on the Pod Save America thing and said, you know, Democrats have a propensity to be killjoys, and we can't constantly be scolding people all the time when they make just honest mistakes. These are not all people who make an honest mistake with the use of a pronoun or ask a question about transgender athletes or raise questions about all kinds of things. They're not necessarily racist or homophobes or bigots, and scolding them and hectoring them and lecturing them alienates people who might be on your side on other things, but B, also fuels this thing that you saw with John Kennedy the other night, which is the kale thing's kind of funny, but that's what this is all about, is kind of this, you know, they are enforcing political correctness on us. They are telling you that you're wrong. They're telling you that you're racist. They're telling you you're homophobic. They're telling you you're misogynist. They're telling you all these things. And the cultural elite, are the ultimate enemy. And like I say, I think it's, you know, it's self-defeating in a lot of ways for Democrats who should be fighting for progressive causes, but sometimes their tactics are self-defeating in both senses. They fuel that anger on the right, and they also alienate people who would otherwise be open to progressive causes when it's like, hey, you know what, like, I'm sorry I didn't say they, you know, I know I'm supposed to say they about you because you're transgender, but like, I'm not used to that. It's not the way I grew up talking that way. I say myself, it's like you know, applying a plural pronoun to someone. I want to be respectful, but I grew up learning English the way that it used to be taught, which is that, you know, singulars are singulars. And like, it doesn't make me transphobic. It just means I sometimes make mistakes. And I think that is what Republicans are preying on in a lot of cases. And it's certainly a lot of the power that Trump had was, you know, this sort of, you would meet people back in 2015, 2016, who would say to you, I know I don't like that he's racist. I don't like that he's sexist, but I also know that like, he's so, the stuff he says is you wouldn't say that shit if you were trying to be careful. You're saying he's being who he really is. And I value that on some level, even if some of the things that he is are things that I don't like. And I'm really sick of people telling of what we see as political correctness. I'm really sick of people telling me how to talk, how to think, how to be. And Trump harnessed that in a very powerful way. And now it is very much, I think you're right, it's very much at the center of what Republicans do now. It's like they don't campaign on policy. You know, they don't campaign on, like, it's not about tax cutting anymore. I mean, they do want to cut taxes. It's not about regulation, but they do want to do those things. But when they go out and make their pitch to voters, it's basically not about like big government versus little government, or big taxes versus high taxes versus low taxes, or it's really just about us versus them. And it's like, I don't know if Ireland, I mean, look, you guys had a long sectarian conflict that was all about us versus them. And it led, and I often cite it to people when people say, when I express my worries about political violence in this country, you know, I'm like, you go look at the literature about talks about the sectarian violence between the Protestants and Catholics. It was like most of the country weren't violent. It's like there's a tiny little sliver of people who are willing to take up arms, and they cause massive chaos and division, in your country for a long time with a very tiny, the IRA was a tiny little thing, and the people who are affiliated with or sympathetic to the IRA was a tiny sliver of the population. But you get just a tiny sliver who's willing to accept violence as recourse, and you can have terror for decades, for generations. And that's where I fear that we're headed, and what January 6th like made everybody afraid of. Hopefully we're going to course correct on that. But I think the Irish experience has something to teach people, because political violence is always it's way more damaging and destructive than some people are willing to acknowledge. And it's also, it doesn't take much, of a society to embrace political violence to throw the whole society into disarray. And I think that's where people say here, well, it's only a very small fringe. And I go, yeah, but a small committed fringe can really fuck things up for everybody else pretty quick. And that's, I remember, I look back on Ireland, that period. I lived in London when that was still happening. I'm like, I remember when they shut the tube down like once a month when I lived in London, because it was a bomb threat. And not great. Let's try to stay away from that. Is one of my main core messages. Sure. It's like, it'd be better if we didn't do that. Let's not go down that path.
That's fair. I saw Adam Kinzinger saying the same thing to Jordan Klepper, where it was the first time it kind of occurred to me is that, this is before the midterms, is that like, this is what a civil war will look like. It will look like Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I don't want to keep you any longer, John. I really appreciate the time. I'm a big fan of the circus, I said to you, but they need to figure out how to get it on Paramount Plus here. I'm back and forth making a documentary at the moment, so I'm back and forth from the States, and I'll binge it when I'm there. But
What's the doc?
Making a doc. It's called Over the Edge. So it's on conspiracy theorists and people who fell down a rabbit hole during COVID and then find themselves like consuming conspiracy theories without realizing it. And that's what the Edge is. So we're over interviewing John Brennan in DC in January. That's the plan. Great. And we wanted to get to a Trump rally, but he's not announcing any. So we're sitting waiting while we get a visa sorted.
Well, it sounds like an interesting doc, number one. Number two, from your lips to God's ears, I'm for the circus appearing on as many platforms in as many countries as possible. Unfortunately, that's way above my pay grade. There is the VPN solution not available to you over there? Have you not figured it out?
It is. You can, but like it's you have to go through Apple and all that shit. But like, so I binged it. So I haven't seen the last episode of the circus, and I love the show. We're probably going to rip you off a little bit for the documentary. I'm not going to lie. Okay,
that's fine. That's since, as I say, great artists, what is it? Good artists copy and great artists steal, or whatever. Borrow and go steal. Go ahead. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So that's great. You should really check out the finale of the show. It's always when we do these finales, especially in an election year. Season finales, we do the hour. It's always we really throw our backs into those, and this one features a couple of surprises, including me getting COVID in the middle of the episode, and I was having to get through that. But it's pretty. It was pretty great. I mean, I'm proud of the show every episode we make, but those hours when we have an election, they're always an extra special thing if you're a circus fan, and we really love the way this one came out, despite certain difficulties that presented themselves along the way. Partly we like it because, at the end of the episode, you'll see we talk about this. It's like, since January 6th, I think, people who are on what I think of as team democracy, not the blue team, not the red team, but for the survival of American democracy and for the survival of democracies in all the Western countries. But, we've all been on edge, we didn't know what was going to happen the next time that an American election happened. The next time people went to the voting booths, and you had all these election deniers running all over the country. And so, it's part of why the last episode is lovely in a way, is that, those guys got beat. They got beat pretty soundly. The election deniers did not have a good day, and there are still obviously members of Congress who voted to decertify. But the out front election deniers who ran for governor, ran for secretaries of state, ran for attorneys general around the country basically got beat, top to bottom. And the ones who were actually at the Capitol on January 6th that got beat, and the ones who said they wouldn't concede or wouldn't or cast doubt on whether they would concede. You know, we give credit to him. It's like, you know, Dr. Oz, you know, it wasn't clear he was going to concede if he lost. He conceded that night. All of them did. Like the ones who were all kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to, I don't know. We'll have to see the outcome.
Has Carrie Lake conceded? Has she?
Other than Carrie Lake, other than Carrie Lake. But I mean, look, I mean, you know, she's I try to see a little bit of the bright spot here. The bright spot here is that, you know, again, I say this not in a partisan way, but you know, the election deniers got beat, and with a couple of notable exceptions, the other ones accepted their defeat gracefully and acknowledged that they lost. You know, even Herschel Walker was asked about Joe Biden. You know, he said that in an earlier debate, he said Joe Biden was the rightful president of the United States. And then last night he started talking about the Constitution and that, you know, that there were bigger things at stake than his own race. And, you know, I've been a pretty harsh critic of Herschel Walker, but it was nice to hear him say those things. And, you know, I mean, it's small. It's small. These are small victories, but, you know, small victories eventually, hopefully get you back on the path towards being a normal country again, which is what we'd like to be.